Once again, another terrible story about a mass killing. When will it stop? Why is it happening here in America? And what can be done? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. Stay tuned as we talk about domestic terrorism in the United States and what can be done. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. Once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us here as we broadcast from the Norfolk State University at WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. As always, we have our producer, Marvin Folks, also known as DJ Scandalous, here in the studio with us, making sure we stay right and tight. And for those of you that participated in our annual spring membership drive, we want to thank you for your support, because without you, we couldn't do what we do. We have, since the Soul of VA has been created, we've had so much engagement with our station, even more so than we had in the past. The new sound, everyone loves it. The shows, the variety, including Stay the Water, you're showing your support. I can't go into the community, Marvin, without people saying, hey, I just want to tell you, I love the show last week, or I listened to you. My wife and I listen to you every Sunday. And again, we do what we do, but we can't be successful unless we have you. So once again, thank you so much for your contribution. Continue to listen to us. And guess what? Just in case you missed it, you can still contribute. So what you can do, you can go to our website at WNSBonline.org. That's at WNSBonline.org. You can contribute, or you can call the station at 757-823-9110 and contribute that way. So whatever, or you can go to our website, however you want to do it, we'll reach you there. And you can give your tax-deductible donation. And that's, Marvin, that's one thing I love about it. It is tax-deductible. So you can actually start off your new year into tax year next year with a tax-deductible donation. But also, we like to thank also our Spartan Nation, because I say it all the time. We've got an alumni and supporters like no other, not just here in the community, not just here in the Commonwealth, not just here in the United States, the greatest country in the world, but in the world. Spartans love their university. They love their community. It is a group of alumni and supporters like no other. So we're very blessed and fortunate in order to be a part of this group. You know, I want to take a break from our Commonwealth Conversation series and talk about this tragedy that's happened in our country again, once again. In Buffalo on last week, you had a lone gunman that traveled from out of town and wanted to make a statement and walked into a grocery store, something that people do on a Saturday. They go to a grocery store, they're shopping, getting their shopping out of the way. And he got out of the car and he started opening fire, killing people in the parking lot. And then he went inside the store, shooting just randomly, innocent person after innocent person after innocent person. Shooting over a dozen people and killing the majority. There were those who were fighting for their lives. And not only that, but also we had a retired police officer worked security there, Marvin, for several years. So it's like everybody knew it. Part of the fabric of the supermarket, part of the fabric of that community. And he lost his life after engaging the terrorists. But unfortunately, he had this armor on that repelled those bullets. And he turned to the security guard and gunned him down. So our hearts go out to all of the family members that lost their loved ones. That's number one. Our heart goes out to the security guard, retired police officer who put his life between that gunman and others to engage him, to turn his attention away before the gunman unfortunately engaged and killed him. Who knows, Marvin, how many additional lives he saved by doing that? But it shows the value of our law enforcement, the value of people who volunteer for that work, the bravery and the courage, the value of our security across the board. Last week, we did our Military Appreciation Month show as part of our Commonwealth Conversation series. And we understand that we live in the greatest country in the world, in large part because we have some of our best and brightest as part of the greatest military in the world. And it's because of men and women like that we're able to do what we do. So we salute that fallen officer, security guard, for what he did and what he was called to do and chose to do. And again, we salute him, and also our hearts go out to his family. But Marvin, I kind of want to just pivot, again to this horrific, in Buffalo, New York, horrific scene. Because it seems like this is happening over and over again, right? It's a story that has no happy ending, right? Because whether that person is locked away for life or that person gets the death penalty, the lives of everybody are destroyed. There's a stain that's placed upon that community, that day, that those people, those families that endured the pain. I mean, and it adds another terrible chapter in our country's history as relates to hate crimes. So I described the scene, but of that day, that infamous day, where someone got out of their vehicle, had it on their mind, got out of their vehicle, came from out of state in order to destroy people's lives. But I want to start to pick it apart just a little bit. So this just wasn't a random individual, right? So this was an 18-year-old man, because you're considered a man at 18, white male from Pennsylvania, right? So he's not even from that area, from what I understand. And he drove into town, into Buffalo, choosing a store in a community that was majority black. Now, of course, I think it was 11 African Americans that were shot, most killed, and 2 whites that were shot. And I think 1 was killed, I believe. But 13 total. But with those individuals that were killed, he was targeting African Americans. Now, immediately, in the second half of the show, we're going to talk about and take a look at a series of these events that have taken place over the course of this is 2022. So we're going to go back just a little bit. We're going to go back even to what I think really kicked all this off, right? We're going to go back to the Charleston shooting at Mother Emanuel Church, 2015. We're going to take a look at the El Paso massacre. We're going to take a look at Charlottesville here in Virginia. We're going to take a look at Pittsburgh Synagogue massacre as well. So Marvin, we're talking almost 10 years of this type of unfortunate behavior that we've seen. So we're going to take a look and analyze those cases and also ask ourselves what can be done, right? But let me take an opportunity just to go through this Buffalo massacre. I remember I heard the story, and then I got a text from a family member, and we have text streams, and I'm pretty sure all of us do. And he sent him, it was my brother, he said, this is absolutely terrible. And at first, I'll be honest with you, I didn't want to click on it and read it at that moment. Because to be honest with you, Marvin, I'm tired. I'm tired of, once again, somebody taking it upon themselves to take out innocent people's lives. He didn't have a confrontation with them. They didn't get into an argument. It wasn't what we call a beef or anything like that, even though that's not really justifiable either. But it makes it even worse because the motive behind it. And we're going to get to the motive in just a moment. But I'm tired. I am emotionally just almost spiritually drained reading these stories over and over again. And I know we're focusing here on the United States, but keep in mind, this also happened in New Zealand as well. And we see it happening in other countries. But again, it is the extremism of domestic terrorism, of hate, acting out in what's called domestic terrorism. And we're going to get to the history of domestic terrorism in this country as well, because the question becomes, are we doing anything about it from a public policy and law standpoint? That's what we really want to ask ourselves, because really that's all that we can do to help stop this, right? So according to CNN, this white male drives into town, goes into Buffalo, New York, finds one of the major African-American majority communities where African-Americans go to that store, gets out of the car. Now, it says that, according to CNN, it says authorities say when the suspect arrived at the store at 2:30 p.m., he was heavily armed, wearing tactical gear, a helmet, and had a camera live streaming his actions. So, hold on. I want to stop right there just for a minute. I'm former military. I understand what tactical gear is. I understand what heavily armed is. I saw the rifle, and we're going to talk about the automatic rifle that he had. These are meant for war on the battlefield. These are not meant for the street. How does an 18-year-old get tactical gear and a helmet and an assault rifle like that? I mean, you start to scratch your head and say, this terrorist is 1 year removed from high school for the most part. He may have just graduated this past year or just last year, but 1 year removed at the most. Most kids are filling out college applications or coming home after their first year of college, or finishing up their associate degree, their trade school, or in the military, finishing up basic training, your OIT training for your job, whatever the case may be, going to your first duty station, whatever. But they're not collecting assault weapons and tactical gear to go on a mass shooting. So again, I scratch my head at that, Marvin, because these terrorists are getting younger and younger and younger and younger. I know the youngest that we've seen in modern times is Columbine, right? The Columbine massacre. How can we forget about that? I mean, that's one of the worst days ever. No parent wants to get a call from the school or see it on the news that there is that type of behavior, that type of tragedy that happens at their school. But this person was not in school. He was out. Also, it says, according to news release from CNN, is that the suspect, he shot 4 people outside the grocery store, 3 fatal. Then he went into the store, exchanged fire with the armed security guard. We talked about him earlier. And then he died of his injuries. So that's 5 shot, 4 dead, immediately coming in. Then he shot 8 more people in the store. 6 died. So, again, what gets into an 18-year-old to want to get in their car. Well, first of all, load the car up, strap up, go into a place and start killing people like that. You know, the police chief, during that time of the press conference the next day, he said that was pure evil. And for the most part, yes, it is pure evil. You got to have evil in your heart to do something like that. But how do you fix the problem to where pure evil doesn't have an outlet to act out that way? You can't change people's hearts. You can't do that. But what you can do is limit the opportunity to effectuate the actions in their heart. It's Stay in the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. Today, we're taking a break from our Commonwealth Conversation series, and we're talking about the tragedy that happened in Buffalo, New York, and the other domestic terrorist acts that are happening in our country, it seems like over and over again. Why are they happening? How can we address it? What can we do to stop it? Is it through the laws? Is it through public policy? Or is it through having an honest conversation with ourselves as a nation? As we continue to delve into, you know, what's taking place in New York, I remember seeing the governor, Kathy Hochul, there. And she said, listen, you know, this street, you know, she says, this is my community. She served on those streets, you know, as a public policy representative, elected official. Tim Russert also, who's also one of the individuals you see on the news quite a bit, and of course loves his Buffalo Bills as well. You know, so, and they said, this is where we live, this is where we work. And for something like this, a tragedy to happen, it took them all back. But he had the assault rifle. So the first thing I want to address is the assault rifle. You know, it was not clear where he got the rifle from. At that time, of course, they're going through it, but the AR-15 with a high-capacity magazine, it was purchased legally. Of course, not in the state of New York, but outside of New York. So you have someone who purchased legally an assault weapon, but also they found that in the past he said some incendiary things that could lead a person to say, hey, maybe this guy should not have an assault weapon, an AR-15, right? So when we talk about the sale of guns, oversight by the states, oversight by the federal government, that's another discussion that seems to get stalled all the time. The mayor of Buffalo, I saw his interview last Sunday morning along with the governor, and he was asked by Chuck Todd on Face the Nation. He said, what is it that the federal government, or do you want people to do? And it was interesting because he was so resolute in what he was saying, just a resolve in his delivery. He said, thank you for, he thanked them for their prayers and their support, but he needs action, legislation action, to prevent individuals from purchasing these type of weapons, to prevent individuals from being able to act upon the evil that's in their hearts. He said, it seems like every time this happens, there's a lot of rhetoric, and a lot of goodwill. But he says there's one group on the side of the aisle that tends to be more silent and stall any efforts to stop these type of actions. And he's right. Let's keep in mind that, and again, I want us all to understand that in the halls of government and in public policy, you have special interest groups. And the gun lobby is a very strong lobby. So you're not just fighting, this is an unfortunate event, but politicians, they're also fighting with the lobby groups as well, because that's part of the system. in which we operate. Again, it's the best system. It's not a perfect system, but it's the best system we have in the world as it relates to government. But at the same time, it can be tweaked. Also, at the same time, you have individuals that step up from time to time and do the thing that will possibly cost them their election, cost them their seat at the table, but ultimately will cause them to stand against the test of time and stand tall to say, what I did was unpopular and it cost me. But at the end, when all others have faded away, because of what I did was right, they'll be credited and known for that, and the right thing will be done. I think about the great Muhammad Ali all the time. He lost a lot, but over time, he lost a lot of his prime, a lot of endorsements, a lot of money, a lot of material things. But over time, he was seen to be right. He was proven to be right, and he was honored. And still to this day, he's honored as that man that took that stand. So do we have public policymakers, politicians, advocates, individuals within communities and homes? Because we have homes that are split over this issue. Do we have them able to stand up and say, no, that's wrong. Enough is enough. We've got to do something. So, again, what would cause this white male, 18 years old, 1 year max removed from high school, to get in his car to secure an AR-15 legally purchased assault rifle weapon and tactical gear and a helmet with a camera strapped to his helmet to stream it live, to go to another state, another city, a community that he's never purported to have been to before, or spend time there, get to know the people there, get out and start killing immediately. What would cause him to do that? So there's a manifesto, purported manifesto, that he wrote. Last Saturday, when this happened, investigators were immediately reviewing a 180-page manifesto posted online in connection to the shooting. 180 pages. This 18-year-old had enough time to write 180 pages. And with this, it basically talks about, him, his hatred for certain groups. Not only that, but his belief that the white population is dwindling in size and the country's being taken over by black people, other non-whites, Hispanics, Jewish people, and the like. That's what's in that manifesto. That's fairly disturbing, because we know this is just not a random act, but this is something that was built up over time, over and over and over and over, where he starts to write this information. He can't be the only one. He can't be the only one out there. And we know he's not, because we're going to talk about these other cases in the second half hour that has happened over the last almost 10 years. And what I believe is the cause behind it and what can be done or what should be done moving forward. But when you write it down and you have that in your heart, it's already fixed in your heart, in your mind. And of course, it's very powerful, right? So you got to be able to understand the power of your words, because and the power of your beliefs, what you put into your own, before your eyes, into your heart, because ultimately it's going to manifest into action. And that's what this terrorist, 18-year-old terrorist did. You know, this is a terrible thing. And his life is destroyed. He'll forever be known for this. It's not a good thing to be known for. Well, from our standpoint, maybe from his standpoint, this is great. You know, we can go all the way back to Timothy McVeigh. We're going to talk about him in the second half hour. But he was unapologetic, even in the execution room, of what he did, because he was doing the right thing in his mind. I tell you, you know, people say money is power, weapons are powerful, is power. I disagree. The most powerful force in this world is belief. Because if you believe it, nobody can pull that away from you. There's absolutely nothing that can stand in your way from manifesting the actions of that belief. We see it all the time. You know, I know it's Sunday. I'm going to go back to a little vacation Bible school. Even Jesus talked about just believe. If you only believe, only believe. That's what he asked. He said, if you only believe, that's it. You know, if you got the faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains, right? So this young terrorist believed what he wrote. And because of that, it cost a lot of people their lives. You know, again, initially 10 killed, 3 wounded. And it's only, it's only been a week, really about 8 days, and we're still kind of pulling the covers back on this. Now, of course, this is currently being investigated as a hate crime. It's being called a hate crime from the AG's office. The Attorney General, Merrick Garland, of course, they're on the local level. They're looking at it as a hate crime as well, which, of course, we know is going to add more prosecutorial power to this case. Of course, he was arraigned the next day, and he pleaded not guilty. And, this thing is going to play itself out, right? It's going to play itself out through the process. But, one thing that he focused on was the great replacement theory, right? And this is something that, we have to really focus on as a country, because it's causing a division amongst the people in our country that will have them pitting one group against the other. And again, it's something that we have to address. When we get into the second half hour about what can be done, I think that's the first thing, Mark. We got to address the education issue. Because again, as I stated, belief is power, right? Belief. So what happens if you believe certain things? Nothing's going to stop you. We got to make sure that we are educating our next generation with the tools that they need to be better citizens, to make better choices. This young terrorist, his life is over. His life is over. Now, whether he gets life in prison, whatever the case may be, his life was just starting. He'll spend the majority of his life in prison. That's no way for anybody, 18-year-old, to start their life. But also, there are others whose life was snuffed out on a Saturday, just going grocery shopping. But we're going to take a look in the second half hour in just a moment at the more recent shootings that we've had and look at the connection between these. This is just not a random act, but it is an epidemic in our country, and we've got to address it. We got to do it now, because if we don't, we're going to lose this battle. And then we'll talk about what can be done next, because something definitely has to be done. It's State of Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'll be back after this moment. Welcome back. It's Stay in the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We want to thank you again for joining us as we broadcast on the campus of the Norfolk State University at Hot 91, the soul of BA. This week we are talking about the unfortunate. We're taking a break from our Commonwealth Conversation series for the month of May because I really wanted to address this issue of domestic terrorism and these mass shootings that are taking place across our country. You know, Marvin and I, we were just talking during the break, and a lot of times you thought that this problem only happened in the old South, that you didn't have to deal with this type of terrorism, of course, with the lynchings and the things of that nature that unfortunately took the lives of a lot of African American men and women and children. Okay, it just wasn't men that were lynched and killed, but also our women as well and our children. But this is upstate New York, you know, what we're talking about with the Buffalo massacre that took place. And, you know, this is 2022, and we're still dealing with this in 2022. At the end of the first half hour, we talked about the manifesto, the belief that this guy had that white people were being replaced. Now, I talk about this as when I do lectures sometimes. I say, you know, it's not justifiable, but you have to understand. You know, I teach from the principle of seek ye to understand, then to be understood. By doing so, you'll make a more well-informed decision. Seek ye first to understand, then to be understood. You know, that first of all, that takes humility because everybody thinks that they're right. But the second thing that it does, it forces you to learn another perspective. It forces you to look through the eyes of that other person. Not only that, but I also say you want to place your feet in the shoes of another person, not necessarily take a walk in it, because you might not want to go where they're being, do what they did, or see what they saw, because you'll be affected the way they were affected. But if you place your foot in their proverbial shoes, your proverbial foot in their proverbial shoes, you do that by listening. You do that by sitting back and analyzing and understanding where that person's coming from. So let me address the fact that he thought, or there is a push and a belief that white men or white people are being replaced in this country. I can understand why he would say that, because when you have laws and public policy that give you access to not 90%, not 95, not 99, but 100% of what America is, and you can do, you have access and opportunity. And the laws and public policy are against not 90, not 95, not 99, but 100% of what non-white males can have. In other words, black people, Native Americans, whomever you are, if you're a non-white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, the laws and public policy in our country for over 300 years were against you. And they were for that small group. So for 300 plus years out of 400, the laws were in your favor. Let's even take it up a little further. After segregation and before the modern civil rights movement of the 1960s, 350 plus years of laws and public policy were in your favor. So you can see why a person would say, wait a minute, we're being replaced because 1%, 2%, 3%, maybe even 5% of the laws now give opportunity to others other than non-white males. So when you used to having 100% or all the pie, and now there are other people that should have been at the table the whole time, that are now at the table saying, okay, now it's time for us to also enjoy a piece of the pie through having access to opportunity. Again, I talk about a hand up, not a handout. Just simply open the door and allow me to come in without resisting, and allow a chair to be pulled up so I can sit at the table and I'll make my own way, right? So I can see why a person would think that, but it's a false belief. It's a red flag, a false flag. It's a red herring that is created, unfortunately, by the reality of the practices of what the laws and public policy created for us. So from my theory of the creation of laws and public policy and in their creation of them and the effect of them in their intent or in its effect is that laws and public policy control beliefs, resources, and people. Because what happens is when we create a law, you got to abide by the law. We're a nation of laws. Marvin, over the course of time, your behavior now is dictated by that law, and your behavior becomes a part of your regular routine. And your behavior becomes so much of a part of your regular routine, it affects your belief. So your belief now is based upon your behavior, which is dictated by that law and policy, which is why I talked about in the first half hour. People believe money is power, military might is power, guns are power. No, belief is the most powerful force in our universe. Because if you believe it, no matter what I do, what I tell you, what I teach you, even if your belief is wrong, you're going to continue to work and do and behave in that manner. You know, I give this story. You know, my maternal grandmother grew up in the segregated South, right? And we're talking about, I call it the real South, the South. And they were taught you couldn't look a white person in their eyes when you talk to them. Now, she lived almost a little bit over 90 years old, almost 91. And we're talking, she grew up in the Great Depression, that time period. Not was born during that time, but grew up in that time, right? So she was experiencing that. And I never forget, I'm a product of integration. I had white friends and things of that nature, went to school with a group of diverse kids. We all went to the same prom, homecoming together and all that good stuff. So I remember we were at a grocery store and we were passing a older white lady, and they spoke, and my grandmother, she was looking down when speaking. And I didn't notice at the time, but my older sister said, "Hey, do you notice how Madeira looks down when she talks that way?" I said, "I didn't. Now that you mention it, yeah, because they were taught you couldn't look a white person in the eyes when they talk with them. You could talk to them, but you couldn't look them in the eyes. It was a sign of disrespect, or you're challenging them, or things of that nature." Now, of course, that wasn't a policy, but it was a practice dictated by the laws at that time of segregation. So even though integration had happened, even though their own children and grandchildren were products of integration, her belief was still, I can't look a white person in the eye. Even though I'm 90 years old, I still can't do that. Even though the laws have changed, I still can't do that. So I can understand it's not justifiable, but I understand why you have this group of people that have had control since the beginning of the country, because it was created by them, have that belief. So now you have, keep in mind, it's only been 50 years that African Americans have had the opportunity through policy and law, the protection of the law, really 56 years when you look at the 1964 and 1965 Civil Rights Acts and the Voting Rights Act, right? So if you really look at that and then the execution of those acts in order to give enforcement to those laws, yeah, about 55, close to 60 years, right? So we've only had that time out of a country that's existed for over 400 years. So you're going to have that resistance. I like to say that the greatest degree of change always yields the greatest degree of resistance. I'm going to say that again. The greatest degree of change always yields the greatest degree of resistance. And why is that? Because when you change something, when something is not changing its status quo, that means it's not moving. But the moment you start to move something, you start to get resistance. The moment you start to move beliefs, you get resistance. The moment you start to move in a direction that is more progressive or as opposed to regressive, you start to get resistance. So we're seeing the greatest amount of resistance now, and we're starting to see it not just after the civil rights movement itself. We saw that with various legal challenges to opportunities and policies that were created to provide opportunities to African Americans to integrate into the greater society with white America that's enjoyed it since the beginning. Again, I mentioned opportunity. Every person that is white is not wealthy and rich. but it's opportunity that you have to be that without having the barriers that individuals of color, black people, have to deal with. So I want to make sure I make that you understand what I'm saying here. Now, Marvin, as we continue to look at that, let's look at an example of school desegregation. School desegregation, you had the greatest, automatically the greatest degree of resistance after Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And then you had some school districts that's still trying to desegregate, up until about 5-10 years ago. But that greatest degree of resistance yielded death threats, actual deaths of people. It also yielded some very despicable, if you step back now in modern time and look at how adults were acting with children going to school, that's some of the most reprehensible, ridiculous behavior that you could see. But again, change. The greatest degree of change always yields the greatest degree of resistance. So let's take a look at what happened after the election of Barack Obama. After the election of Barack Obama, immediately you started to see an uptick in what's called hate extremist groups. These are groups that are like Ku Klux Klan is a perfect example, probably the number one example of, hate in the country, neo-Nazis and things of that nature. But you also saw other small groups start to activate. And then you saw an online movement of this as well. So when you see this uptick of what's happening. And then a lot of this wasn't reported, though, because the president administration at the time really wanted to bring the country together. A lot of this would have continued to tear the country apart if they, according to some, but I think information like that should be discussed in a context where you start to address an issue before it becomes an epidemic. So in 2022, we had the unfortunate massacre in Buffalo. That'll be known as that day, a day that will live in our American history. Another terrible chapter of that massacre. Not a good thing whatsoever. But before that, before 2022, we had 2015. June 17th, 2015. We had the white supremacists that went into Dylan Roof, who is from, Shelby, North Carolina, and went into a church, Mother Emanuel Church, which, of course, that African Methodist Episcopal Church has so much historical value. I mean, to not just African Americans, but the country, because it was the first church built in that particular area after the Civil War, African American. It was a testament to African American upward mobility. It was a center of not just religious and spiritual, but also community in that community. And just so much more. It was a church that welcomed everybody. They welcomed Dylan Roof. On a Bible study night, of course, you're not going to have that many people on Bible study night, during that time period in the week. Of course, every congregation has their largest visitors during Sunday service. So you have this individual that comes in, Dylan Roof, this domestic terrorist, and he sits through Bible study. Sits there. He's sitting in a church doing Bible study, hearing the word of God, seeing the love of the people. And then before they dismiss, he gets up and starts to shoot and kill the members of that church. The pastor, the elderly, women, men in that church. He starts to gun them down. He starts to shoot and kill so many that he reloaded and started killing them again. 6 women, 3 men, from ages 87 to 26. 8 died at the scene. The 9th died at the hospital. All killed at close range. Now, 5 persons survived the shooting. They were unharmed. Thank God for it. And there was a 5-year-old who was a great-granddaughter of somebody. A granddaughter of someone that survived. And even kind of going back at this, they're called the Emmanuel 9 now. Come on, man. A church, elderly people, Bible study. That's where you want to go and target. That was a terrible act. And I thought that would have opened up the eyes of the country. But unfortunately, it did not. This is Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We're talking about, once again, another senseless massacre, mass shooting, perpetuated by white male on the basis of hate, who had it in his heart through a manifesto in order to bring about some of the greatest harm and shame on our country. Where does it end? Where can we address it? How can we stop it? We just talked about it, Mother Emanuel, when I believe where this really started, really the uptick of this type of hatred. And then in 2017, in our own backyard, we have the Charlottesville Unite the Right March, which culminated with the white supremacist terrorist attack of a white male driving a car into a crowd of people. And you see, if you look at this famous photo, and it's famous now for all the wrong reasons. This neo-Nazi drives this car into a group of people, and innocent people, and you see bodies flying up. And then, unfortunately, there were many that were hurt. One female, she died. And immediately, and I'm going to say her name, Heather Heyer, 32 years old. She unfortunately died at the hospital of her injuries. 5 people were in critical condition at that time, and 14 were treated for lesser injuries. So when you talk about it, total, 35 people were injured when he drove his car into that group. Again, this individual was under 30 years old. Again, a white male with the belief, a neo-Nazi. Of course, their beliefs are in line with hate for not just black people, but also Jewish people as well. And we thought that happened during the time of former President Donald Trump. And we thought, it's time for this president will speak out against this and ensure that this doesn't happen again. We can do something. And of course, he doesn't do that. He appeases, of course, everybody denounces the attack, but he appeases those individuals there saying they're good people on both sides. So once again, an opportunity for people to stand up and do the right thing. And unfortunately, it was stopped. So South Carolina, Virginia, and then in 2018, Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, where another white male goes into a Jewish synagogue and opens fire and kills 11 people. 7 injured, including the shooter himself, who, when he was being treated for his injuries, according to reports, they said the gunman crawled out of the room and surrendered, having been shot multiple times. As he received medical care in police custody, as he's receiving medical care for being shot multiple times, he's in police custody. He allegedly told a SWAT officer that he wanted all Jews to die and that Jews were committing genocide against his people And I guess he's assuming white males. And this material was also included in a criminal complaint that was filed in that county. The victims, their ages ranged from 54 that died to 97. Again, some of the most the people of our community, these are people that we should protect. Some of the most vulnerable people are being killed. Our elderly, who we should honor. I don't care who you are. Once you reach a certain age, well, you should respect everybody. But when I was growing up, if you didn't say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, especially open the door for everybody, but especially your elders, that was a no-no. I mean, you had to do it. But unfortunately, we're seeing where that's not taking place. So you would think after 2015, after 2017, after 2018, after South Carolina, after Charlottesville, Virginia, after Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, legislation would be signed, something would be done. But it didn't happen. Then we have 2019, El Paso. So on August 3rd, 2019, another domestic terrorist attack occurred in Walmart, a Walmart store of all places, in El Paso, Texas. A mass shooting, according to reports of a far-right gunman, killed 23 people and injured 23 people. That's 46 total. So we see the numbers are going up, right? So we're seeing the numbers in double digits. In Mother Emanuel, the numbers are single digits. Charlottesville, low double digits. They got a little higher, still in low double digits in Pittsburgh, and now in El Paso, high double digits. According to the reports of the FBI investigation, they investigated the shooting as an act of domestic terrorism and also a hate crime. And the shooting was being declared and described as the deadliest attack on Latinos in modern American history. The domestic terrorist, 21 years old. 21 years old. Again, all these individuals had something in common. They were white males, all under 30 years old, all had an assault rifle, AK, whether this guy had an AK-47, another guy, most had AR-15s. First of all, where you get AK-47 from, I don't know, but AK-47, Kalashnikov, where do you get that? With an extended magazine. And they all believed and espoused the same belief that their country was being taken over by blacks, Latinos, and Jews, and that they were being pushed out. So, again, 2015, South Carolina. 2017, Charlottesville, Virginia. 2019, Pittsburgh Synagogue. 2018, Pittsburgh Synagogue. 2019, El Paso. You would think that it would stop. But 2022, Buffalo, New York. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you see how we've gone from the Deep South, worked our way up to the North. So this is just not a problem in what's called the Old South. But this is now an issue in areas that were deemed to be more progressive, deemed to be part of the Union. This is an issue that we're seeing that's continuing to go up. According to the Center for Public Integrity, investigating inequality, it shows how the majority of these hate crimes, we're seeing Black American victims are still victims. Black Americans are still victims of hate crimes more than any other group. So yes, other groups are being targeted, but Black Americans is usually the case, and it still is to this day, according to this report by the Center for Public Integrity, are still more than any other group victims of these hate crimes. You know, I remember the unfortunate case of James Byrd. You know, James Byrd was actually dragged and decapitated after some white males picked him up, you know, as he was walking in East Texas, and they tied a rope around his neck. At some point, they got him out, beat him up, tied a rope around his neck, and dragged him until his head came off. You know, it was one of the most gruesome deaths in 1998 that you'll ever see. But right there in Jasper, Texas, it took place there. But unfortunately, even at that time period, and we're talking like, according to the Center for Public Integrity, since 1995, Black Americans have been the victims of 66% of all racially motivated hate crimes, according to the FBI data collected from local law enforcement agencies. You know, no single agency would track these arrests or cases, and they're supposed to be reported to FBI. So when we start to analyze these cases, first of all, when we start to look at solutions, I believe we need a central database for this. And also not just central database, but in asking the mayor of Buffalo and also the governor and others around various roundtables that were discussing this incident on last week and even now, even till today, we have the opportunity as a society, especially with social media and the like, where this information is on the internet, we can track this stuff. We can know who's at the point where they're going to do something like this. This is not like Timothy McVeigh, which still, to this day, is the deadliest domestic terrorist act on our soil, where he drove a van at the bottom of a federal building in Oklahoma. And I always kind of get teary-eyed when I think about this, because if you go back and take a look at that building, he blew it in half. It was 1,000-pound, I think, fertilizer bomb in that truck. And the unfortunate thing, a lot of people died. It's still deadliest domestic terrorist attack in the history of our country. Unfortunately, there was a daycare at the bottom of that building. So not only you had people who were working, but you also had the children and things of that nature. And even during his execution, he believed so much in what he believed in. Again, I talked about belief, that he wasn't apologetic at all for what he did. You know, when we talk about change, Marvin, we're the change. We're the ones that can make that change. But we have to have courage to do it. First, it starts with education. From a law enforcement standpoint, I believe it starts with cataloging and tracking this information and ensuring that individuals are not able to act out on the evil in their hearts. As we live our life, we have to live our life. We have to love everybody, respect everyone. You may not agree, but you can choose to agree to disagree. Shake hands and walk away. Hopefully, we can get to that point, but it all starts with you, starts with me, so that our posterity, our children, our future can enjoy what we have. This is State of Water. I'm your host, Dr. Claville. We'll see you next week.